Hey jerks, let's talk about React. So by the end of this lesson, you should be able to change state and parent components. So first, we're going to start with a little bit of review. So I have a list of 3 dogs over here. And your initial task is to take this array of 3 dogs. This is going to be state in a component. Then you're going to make a list of child components that displays each of those. Are there any questions about how you do this? Mostly review from yesterday. Yeah?
How do you mean list?
So you will have this in state. You need to iterate over it. And for each one of these dogs, make a dog component show up that just lists their name. Bonus points if you want to put an image URL or something on each of those also, but that's the task. Other questions about what your task is right now? Go. So when you're done, you should have something that kind of looks like that.
And we're actually doing it, not like pseudocode?
Correct. You're actually using create React app and making this app.
Sick.
After you npm create React app install, you should just be able to do create npm create React app name, right?
Just create React app.
Oh, okay.
Is possible event emitter memory leak detected a big deal? I think it might just be because of how old my laptop is. I get a few of these runs whenever I do npm files.
Interesting.
That probably is how old's the laptop?
2014.
I already installed it.
Shouldn't be that bad.
Okay.
As long as stuff's working.
Yes, that's
better.
working.
What you got?
My npm, they're not working. That's not working.
Okay, so let's install it again. Install npm install.
Oh.
And you want to install it globally.
That's why I'm having to use npx every time.
Yeah.
Having to go global.
Because otherwise, yeah, you do install it for every project. Yep, dash G. That's what makes it global.
Oh, I see. Then that's what happened.
Cool. Now you can just do create React app.
Okay.
All they want.
And yeah, okay. Create React app and the name.
The name of the project. Nothing quite like a dozen people running npm install on a giant fucking thing at the same time on a shitty wireless network.
That'll do it.
That was one of the first things I learned about live coding at conferences and stuff. Is, luckily, somebody told me this. They're like, never npm install in front of an audience. Well, it's like you'll just troll yourself in front of the entire room. All conferences have garbage Wi-Fi.
True. Segment stations was so good.
Under the hood, what
what idiot called it dad bod and not father figure.
Oh.
Hold on. Your little dog component can be either, but I would experiment with trying to make that a functional component. Oh, hello, Ethan.
Need index.js to npm start? Or
Yes.
could you app JS?
You need your index.js. Did you build it by hand? You should have just gotten it for free.
I know, I deleted it because I thought that's what we did yesterday.
Nope. Super need that one. Good news is they're the same on all of them, so if you already have one, you can just copy it over.
Okay.
It's strange that they have an ad for the building that's only visible from the private patio for people who rent at the building.
It's a strange,
One of my former bosses had a bad habit of bringing 10+ pounds of apples in at least once a year and throwing them at people. You can't even think he was less normal. I like that. I'll start doing that. Look at. do a couple more minutes. The most dramatic channels in Denver devs are always the ones that have anything to do with code. There is a brutal discussion happening in TV shows right now over whether or not the Game of Thrones channel got out of hand.
What was the argument that it did?
That it was basically just turned into a channel for people to complain about Game of Thrones. But some people like Game of Thrones.
Oh.
So it was pretty bad at one point.
Why?
And then
Being in fights or something? Or?
just like people who were permanently unhappy about the show and yucking other people's yum. I guess I don't get it, but it does sound like you've decided that the channel wasn't set up to discuss the show, but that it was set up only to heap praise upon it. If that's the case, maybe we should set a clear expectation when you set up a channel for the total show. Sycophantic praise only. All dissent from the pre-approved party line about the show will be deleted. So that's about where that conversation's descended to. Desktop props? Maybe just props.
Maybe just props. I tried to do too much at one time, so that I got a bunch of errors. I should take it one step at a time.
Elephant carpaccio is the term for that. Eat the elephant one slice at a time.
Yeah, yeah.
I heard there's a different Slack channel where someone was referring to elephant carpaccio, and there was a ridiculous discussion on whether or not that term is offensive to vegans. All right, let's work through this together. And then we'll take a little break after that, let you get caught up. All right. Oops. So I'm going to create React app Barkwire. Cool. So over here, I'm going to npm start. And it's a miracle. All right, we got a React app. So the next thing that I usually do is I go around deleting boilerplate. So if we hop into the source directory, I'm going to go into this CSS file and delete everything. Then we go into this index CSS file and delete everything. And then I'm going to go to this app.js file they so thoughtfully made for me. Get rid of that, and then get rid of all of this. So this is what we're starting with. So the first thing we need to do is get those dogs in state. So what's the first change I need to make? I'm going to put the dogs in state. Need to turn this into a class-based component. If it has state, it needs to be a class. Has state, it needs to be a class. If it has state, it needs to be a class. So good news is that it's pretty easy to just turn something back and forth from class to functional. We're going to get rid of the function keyword and make it class. We also need to extend React.component, which we can also do like that. Or if you haven't seen that syntax yet, you can keep it the way it is and just do React.component. They're the same thing. Cool. And then instead of returning this, we don't return things out of classes, use a render method. So we make a render method and throw that inside. And if we did all this correctly, we should be able to get something to show up on the page. And we do. Neat. All right, the thing we're trying to get is that list of dogs to render. So let me give you a hint of what that like red-green refactor kind of approach looks like for this. So if we say backwire, and it's got an unordered list with Bixby, Mesa, and Ted. Cool. This is all we're trying to do. We're already done. Now we just need to make it dynamic and keep it working the whole way. So, one way to do that, I can say state dogs and then make that array that I drew out earlier. Bixby, Mesa. Okay, so I have those dogs in state. Everything's still working okay. Now, I need to figure out a way to get those hard-coded dogs to replace these hard-coded LIs. So maybe I make a dogs method. And I do something like this dot state dot dogs. I need to take a dog object and turn it into a dog element. So 3 dogs, 3 elements. Sounds like a map to me. And then I return back li dog.name, something like that. And then instead of this, I should delete these and they go away. And I should be able to say this.dogs and they come back. Nope. Because I need to return that too. And the dogs are back. We go green, broken, green. Green, broken, green. That's what we're trying to do. Okay, cool. So now this list is dynamic. I can add dogs to it. And they show up on the page. Badass. So the next thing that I need to do is figure out a way, instead of hard coding this, I turn those into dog components. So I'm going to touch source dog.js. Yep, that wasn't good. Backfire. So to make this a functional component, I still need to import React from React. Then I need to export default function. We'll call it dog. Dog takes in props and returns something like, let's say div props, not this dot props, props dot name, and that's really all that thing needs to do. So that needs to get imported. Import dog from dog. And now, instead of this hard-coded thing here, we're going to see if we can make that a dog whose name is dog.name, like so. And there they are. That's it. That's how you get the list to show up. So I'm going to give you a couple more minutes. Get caught up.
Good. That's a warning, it's not an error.
Yeah, that's weird. So it's
Okay, show me your code.
got dog shit, no problem? Unexpected, 22 will snap. Okay. Because all of this is still in the constructor.
Yeah.
Alright, pro tip, you basically never need to use constructor. I don't even care if you guys never do this in the next 3 weeks. There's pretty much no good reason to do it. You can do state like this and not have to do super, not have to do the constructor method. Don't do it.
What if we're passing props through though?
Even if you're passing props through.
So how would that do it?
They'll just become available on this up props.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
Even when it's going back up, sorry?
Yep.
Like, so, cause we were passing props through constructor super, is that what you just asked?
Yep.
Okay, gotcha.
Exactly. You get that. That's the default behavior. You only need to use the constructor if you're going to override that. And spoiler alert, you don't need to. Alright. Okay. So we've got indentation kind of all over the place here. So that looks right. Okay. Yeah, you're not closing out your render. That's closing the class. And also it shouldn't have a signal. There you go. Beautiful. So, where's the dog getting eaten? Where's the dog getting used? Try dog at him. Dog. There we go. Alright, see some dogs, I see some dogs. I see some dogs, I see some dogs. Tell me you got dogs showing up? Beautiful. And you got dogs showing up. Probably don't want to semicolon. Okay, you're gonna start again. LS. Okay, so you have to do beautiful. And we can get started. Alright, cool. Now we'll at least have a real problem. Yeah, I'll get rid of it. This is Linux, right? Yeah. Super shouldn't have this problem in Ubuntu. Look up that error. I'm pretty sure there's like a cache clear or something you can do.
That's weird because I had it working with containers.
Bud showing up?
With React.
You think you got Bud showing up? Good work. Cool, and
Really?
okay, so now what I want you to do is we're going to figure out how we can select a dog and make that dog's name show up in our app component. So this will look something like the currently selected dog is Ted. So we should see that. Now the trick is that we also want to, opposite. There we go. We want to make it so that if I click Mesa, it says Mesa, and if I click Bixby, it says Bixby. So think about the data flow on this. I have this and this, and then the selected dog is here. So I need to click this one and send that up here. Click this one, send it up here. So this is child communicating with parent. Questions about that? App owns dogs. That's why I was able to pass the name of those dogs in like that. But I need to be able to take an action on one of these and have that change something up here. That's our actions up kind of thing. So I want you to code along with this. So start by hard coding this. We're going to use that same red-green refactor kind of approach. We'll say the currently selected dog is Ted. What do you think the next step is to making this more dynamic?
Replacing Ted with this dog.
Exactly. So I need to store that in state somewhere. So I'm going to say selected dog is Mesa. We're going to keep that in state right where we have dogs. And now we're going to swap that out with this.state.selected dog. So if we did that right, cool, currently selected dog is Mesa. Neat. Now we need a way to change that. And this is like one of the biggest things I want you to take out of this lesson. State and the means to change that state need to be in the same place. I have to write the thing that changes selected dog where selected dog is. I need to write the thing that changes selected dog where selected dog is. I need to write the thing that changes selected dog where selected dog is. So I write a method here that does something like this dot set state selected dog is name. So what the state is and the thing that changes that, those are roommates. Now, the wild thing, this is how we make this goofy shit happen. This method we can pass in as a prop to other components, and they can call it. So I can say, all right, dog, you have a prop named name. Here's the value you should bind to that. I also want you to have an update selected dog prop. That's this dot update selected dog. Since that's starting to get a little bit unwieldy now, here's how you clean that up. we can make that a little bit easier to read there. And then when you start getting a bunch of props for these, put each of one of them on their own line, like that. It makes it a lot easier to read. Pop quiz. How come I didn't say this.state.update selected dog?
You don't want it from state, you want it from the updated selection.
Yeah, because the class owns update selected dog, not the state. The class owns state, state owns selected dog. Cool. Anybody need more time, or anybody have any questions about what's happening here? Yeah?
You always just call it app class.
App is the conventional name for the top level component in a React app. So a lot of times, app is not usually this busy. All app does is just bring a bunch of smaller things together. Good question. What else? Cool. So now the dog component has access to that as a prop. So what I need to be able to do is make it so that when this is clicked, that function gets called. How do I handle events in React? On click. And this is the tricky part about this. Actually, does anybody know the tricky part? If I do something like this.props.update selected dog, like, that doesn't really work. Why? Or if I try to pass in props.name. That's fundamentally the thing that I'm trying to do, but there's a reason that writing it this way won't work. And you're going to do this about 400 times over the next 3 weeks. So get used to it. Why doesn't that work? Think about regular old JavaScript, what click handlers are looking for. What are, if you just write an add event listener, click, what is it expecting to get passed in? A function definition. Is that a function definition? What is it? It's invoking a function.
What if you just take out props.name? Won't do anything with that.
So if you do that, that'll work, because that's a function definition. However, what's it expecting? Yeah, it does need that, and so what's it going to invoke that function with? Starts with an E?
Event.
Event. Yeah, it's just the event. It's going to invoke it with the event. In this case, we don't care about the event. We're not doing anything with it. So this needs a function definition? Fine. Now it has one. Or, since we're not actually doing anything with the event, ta-da. You'll see this pattern a lot. This is a function definition. This is the entire body of the function, and it's just calling that. So, does it work? Currently selected dog is Mesa. Womp womp. Oops. Know this in functional components. All right, does it work? Womp womp. All right, this dot set state is not a function. I'll believe that for a second. Oh shit, I do this all the fucking time. This is another thing that you will do wrong at some point. And I'm sure Damon talked about this yesterday, probably Stephanie too. I'll tell you, the problem is that the this binding got changed. Anybody know how I fixed that? It's like one of my least favorite things about React right now.
Like bind this to the handle. I don't know how to do that.
We could do that in the constructor, or there's a different way we can write this function. Write it as an arrow function. Don't need to change anything else. There we go. All right, does it work? There's Bixby. There's Mesa. There's Ted. There's Bixby, Mesa, Bixby, Ted. So we have dogs and selected dog. We passed those each into these components as props. They're state for app, they're props for the dog component. And then this, or sorry, it doesn't bring in selected dog, brings in update selected dog. And then we invoke update selected dog in each of these. And since it was defined up here, changes it up here. Questions? Yeah.
Can you just bring up the on-click logic real quick?
This one?
Where do you have the on-click? Yeah. Okay.
Sometimes in the labs you see this written as handle click. And then inside that you do props dot update selected dog props dot name. And then inside of this you just put handle click. That works too. It's the exact same thing. Bixby, Ted, Mesa.
So after you write a function in the parent, channels can use it?
Yes.
So what if you just did on-click update selected dog and customer name and not pass the prop through? You just
Say that, like hard code the name?
What if you like pass name, props.name through, but you didn't pass through update selected dog as a prop on the parent?
Like this? Like I just do that?
If you did that, could you call update selected dog and just pass props.name on click? Or why does it need to be a prop? If you
Ah.
access?
So, because that's the way that React works. Now, I'll say that that's not how Vue works, it's not how Ember works, it's not how Angular works. The way that all of those work is kind of more what you're talking about, where instead of passing in a function that can update this state, this inner component fires off an event that the outer component can listen to. You go, okay, this event happened, and when that happens, I want to call this function. And all of that orchestration happens in the parent, not in React. React, you pass everything down. There's actually, there's names for those two patterns. And I did talk about them once. Slides. And I made a little graphic. Let's see, was it app architecture? There we go. So that pattern where like I pass down state as props and I send up events, and I listen for events here, and I change the state. That's the cycle. That's called the emitter pattern. Event emitters, super common in the other frameworks. The other way this happens is I give you state, and I also give you functions to change the state. That's closures. But it's how a child can change something up here.
And then, so you have to pass the function, right? Okay.
Cool, more questions?
If you pass functions like all the way down, when you have multiple children, is it call back all the way to the?
Exactly. That's called prop drilling, and I think it's fine. There are some people that place arbitrary limits on how much you do that with. But you can absolutely have a component that has a component that has a component that has a component that has a component, and put some state up here and some update state function up here, and pass those all the way down through there. Prop drilling is the name for that.
But you have to declare it each time through each layer.
Correct. And you can rename it for that matter also. They don't have to be the same names. But these two are roommates. Where the state is defined and the means to update it have to live next door to each other. But you can send them on a road trip. I like this metaphor. Keep using this. Send them on a road trip to the center of the earth. If you want to, that's fine. Great question. Yeah.
Is there any way to make functions for state like more global or modular, so you can like import components from another file that also change state, or?
The thing you're searching for is client-side state management. So Redux is a tool for doing that. There's a few others. MobX. Last night's presentation at the React meetup was about a different one. But it's an alternative to prop drilling. So essentially, instead of doing that, we have a store that has all of the state for the entire app. And then if I have these different layers of components, each one of them can read out of that store directly and fire off actions to the store. I find the particular implementation of that in Redux distasteful. It is easier to understand, I think, than a lot of the alternatives, but I think it also leads to a lot of shitty architecture decisions. Because with this approach, you're defining really clean APIs. All right, this thing right here depends on this data. I don't give a shit where it comes from. It just needs to be passed to me at some point. I don't care if it came from directly above me or 500 things above me. I just need to have a name to function. And if you keep that approach for all of these components, I think you end up with much cleaner architecture. I think this encourages bacchanalian orgies of and then I get this here, and I get it here, and I get it here, and I pass stuff around. And that's how you end up just spaghetti coding the fuck out of your architecture. And within 20 components, you can't find where anything is anymore. Yeah.
So as far as creating the function, passing it down, getting the result back at the top, it starts with the function update selected dog that you create below the state, and then it goes into the dogs, calling the dogs function. And then when you say this got update selected dog, then it's going to go into the dog class and see what's up. Is that the flow?
So Sure. So let's draw it out. Over here in app.js, I've got dogs. I have selected dog. And I have update selected dog. These first two are state. This one's behavior. So I define the state on that state object. I define the behavior somewhere on the class. These are like values. This is a function definition. Everybody clear on that so far? Cool. So inside dog.js, I pass dogs, or a dog, and update selected dog. So those are both props on dog. And then I say on click call props dot update selected dog with my name, whatever one that I have. And so what that happens is this function definition that got passed in here is invoked. Because remember, in JavaScript, we can pass around function definitions like Booleans and strings and everything else. They're just values. And like, that's very counterintuitive. But you get this thing that you can invoke, and you can just pass it around, save it, make copies of it, do whatever. So I defined it here, and it has access to this entire scope. And I pass it in here where I call it, and it still has access to this scope out here, and this scope in here. Anybody remember that definition of a closure? Talked about a couple weeks ago? Oh shit, indeed. Do you remember it? It's when an inner scope keeps a reference to an outer scope after the outer scope has executed. That's why, even though I call the function inside this component, it can change this state. It can change this state. It didn't even get that passed in. But it's because this was defined out here, so it sees all of this scope because that's where it was defined. That's a closure.
So even though it's defined in that outer scope, the callback goes to the inner.
It was defined out here so it can see all these things. Dog.js can't see all those things, but this function can because it was defined here. It's where it's from. I'm from Seattle. I'm in Denver right now, but like, I still know all this shit about Seattle because that's where I'm from. You don't know it, but I came to Denver. I can still call up the Hurricane Cafe. Well, I could have if it hadn't closed, but I still remember all the stuff that was defined where I was born. What else? Yeah, Jackson.
And then just the last little, just like it's the last link I'm missing
Mhm.
is where is it actually being passed in the code right now? Like where is it being
Yes.
Where he's between the LIs, it's dog and then name, updates with the dog.
Since we can just pass this shit around as values, we pass it the same way we pass state. We give it some state, we give it some behavior. Yeah.
So with state, when you expand your app, the topmost level, is that the only place you're actually defining state, or can you define state just to the highest common component? So like you can like define state in different components that way, so you can actually delegate where state's actually being defined.
Correct.
Instead of having it all at app.js.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's the most common way to do this in React, is you find the furthest down shared ancestor and you keep the state there. So if these three things all need access to this state, they all need to have a parent that keeps that state. What else?
So let's say like app holds some information that this other component needs, but that component's children need some extra information, and also that one thing from app. So when you set state in that parent component, does that affect app state at all, or how does that work?
So state changes trickle down. If you have outermost component and inner component and one inside that, and I've got state, owner, and state, dogs, and both of those end up getting passed through here. If I need to change this state, it's roommates. It's got to get defined there. If I have to change the owner, that function needs to get defined there. I can pass those in. I can call them either place, but if I change the dog state inside this, what does this component give a shit? It's not using that state. It can't. So I can change the dogs. That's going to force this to re-render with the new information, and I still have the same owner as before.
So then owner would be a prop for that second component, right?
Correct.
And then also have a separate state for dogs.
Yep.
Okay.
Where these are passed in, that's a prop. That goes from state to prop. And this goes from prop to prop, state to prop. And every one of those little interface points, you get a chance to rename it there also. More questions?
So you were saying that if this dog function, if it was a class,
Mhm.
you don't have to pass props through as a parameter, it just has this dot props already?
I'll prove that shit. Okay, so I have a functional component, nothing under this sleeve, nothing under this sleeve. So I'm going to make that class dog extends react dot component. Does not do that anymore. Cool. This needs to be inside of a render function now. Render method, sorry. Neat. And then this needs to, I could put it in there and keep it the same, or I can put it out here like that, and now it has to be this dot handle click, and this needs to be this dot props, and this needs to be this dot props. but does it still work? Good call. Perhaps. Cool. Hey, weird. No constructor necessary. So the reason that you do the constructor, first of all, as soon as you define it, you need to put props in, do super props, all that shit. But you can also define state in these, that's fine. But I think probably your best use case for constructor is if you hate this syntax, and I kind of do. You can do things like this dot handle click dot bind this. And now I can write that the way that I like to write it. And that should still work. Nope. Oops, screwed something up. But the problem is the this binding changes, because it's conceptually similar to self in Ruby, but not really. It's way more complicated. And this is currently the most broken thing in React right now. And you've heard people whispering in the winds probably about React hooks. Hooks are a way to get around this. So we don't have to use the this keyword anymore. It's just so confusing that, like, I think it's a worthwhile value to strive for a this-free JavaScript life. And it's possible. But as soon as you start using classes, this and classes kind of go hand in hand. Just like self and classes did in Ruby. Yeah?
This might be like out of scope for this, but is there anything with the life cycle that would extremely benefit us moving forward now? Like life cycle methods?
Yes. Component did update. Or no, sorry, component did mount. Yeah. Component did mount, you need that one. The other ones, other than render is technically a lifecycle method, so is constructor. All the other ones, probably not. The reason that there are 14 other lifecycle methods is almost entirely for performance reasons. If something is re-rendering too often and it's slowing down the app, then like you can use lifecycle methods to kind of further fine-tune that. But component did mount. You need that one to do any kind of asynchronous stuff like fetches. Past that, don't worry about it. Students have had mighty fine React capstones without anything else. Cool, what else? Neat, so here's the challenge I'm going to throw to you before lunch. I would like you to try to make an app like the following. Those like jumbotrons out in the front of schools say things like, "Welcome back." So I want you to see if you can figure out a way to display that at a top level component, and then on an inner component have a set of radio buttons, and you may need to look at the MDN reference for radio buttons, as red, green, and blue. And when this changes, hint, hint, when the value of this changes, it changes the color of the text. Ooh, that's a tricky one. There's a nuance to that one I didn't remember. But see if, and you can do this in pairs. I don't care if you do this as an entire fucking team. I don't care. See if you can figure that out. Because you're going to need to define some stuff here and pass it in, and then change it back up through there. Questions? go and be merry.
One last question on that line.
Mhm.
We don't have to use it generally, right? That was just if you want to rewrite your syntax.
Correct.